Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Zuma ascended to the South African presidency on 9 May 2009 on a wave of popular euphoria fueled by voters and fellow party politicians alike. A controversial candidate, Zuma's rise to power had withstood a long succession of ethical and legal fights. In 2005, then Vice President, Zuma had been stripped of his rank following allegations of sexual assault and corruption, yet his popularity endured.
In my judgment, the state has not proved the accused's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The accused is found not guilty.
Zuma's acquittal opened the way to advance his campaign for the African National Congress president. Having usurped Thabo Mbeki as the head of the ANC in 2007, following a successfully waged internal struggle, his popularity surpassed Mbeki's with the party, and Zuma was well placed to assume leadership of the country in the next national election, with Mbeki tendering his resignation as President of the Republic in September of 2008, following reports of political interference in Zuma's trial. The path was clear for Zuma to seize power, pending the outcome of his case. Found innocent in a controversial ruling, he was sworn in as president just days later, taking over from interim president Kgalema Motlanthe. Despite his popularity, enthusiasm at Zuma's appointment was not unanimous. While supported by the Tripartite Alliance, as well as the semi-autonomous ANC Youth and ANC Women's Leagues, Zuma was openly distrusted and opposed by factions within the ANC leadership and by political opposition. He was also ridiculed and distrusted by the media and business classes, who suspected foul play and judicial bias following his escape from corruption charges. Zuma's rise and Mbeki's closely associated fall from power was also a primary cause in the formation of the Congress of the People, a political party founded by a disgruntled contingent of the ANC who had turned their back on the party. In the media, Zuma was criticized for his perceived involvement in the controversial South African arms deal, finalized in 1999. The deal, which involved accusations of bribery labeled against Zuma, as well as his financial advisor, Schabir Shaik, and several others, concerned the purchase of military equipment required for replacing the country's dated existing arms. The alleged bribes amounted to what was almost 2 billion rands. In addition, Zuma's credentials for taking the country forward were questioned given his lack of a formal education. Zuma was also ridiculed in the media for his perceived ignorance, with statements he made during his sexual assault trial. Having admitted to sex with a woman he knew to be HIV positive, Zuma claimed he had sought to diminish the likelihood of infection by taking a shower. This sent people into a frenzy. Zuma caricatures with the shower head were everywhere. Zuma's election campaign was built largely on a platform of Zulu nationalism and charisma. He projected this identity and character through an ideology of leftism. He excelled in rallying supporters through his engagement in traditional folk song and dance, as well as protest-era remembrance. Furthermore, rather than work against him in the eyes of his supporters, Zuma's numerous criminal trials, coupled with Mbeki's interference in Zuma's corruption trial, played a significant part in heightening his image as a figurehead of the people's struggle, resulting in at times vindictive support of Zuma against his prosecutors. Zuma's image continued to be widely celebrated following his election, as he was considered an active member of the wider Zulu community, while widely regarded as having the best interest of the people at heart. This image was contrasted all the more given the negative perceptions of Mbeki prevalent across the country, with the former president predominantly perceived as cold and overly business-minded. Zuma was quick to emphasize unity upon taking office. Addressing the country at his inauguration speech, he spoke of a firm commitment to continue the nation-building project established during Nelson Mandela's presidency. Zuma also promised to work towards building a more impartial and efficient society, a goal he spoke of achieving within a single term in office. For Zuma, much of the country's problems could be attributed to what he perceived to be ineffective management of service delivery budgets, poor tendering, and corruption. Problems that could supposedly be corrected by decentralizing presidential powers and disposing of incompetent officials. The promise of employment was also central, with unemployment sitting at 21.5% at the time of Zuma's inauguration. The millions of jobless South Africans presented a notable obstacle for the government to overcome. The significance of the unemployment problem was all the more prevalent given the impact of a global economic downturn following the Great Recession of 2008. By the end of September 2011, unemployment had risen to 25.3%, though it dipped marginally in the third quarter to 24%. It was not until 2011, the year following the FIFA World Cup hosted in South Africa, that decisive action was taken. Declared as the year of job creation, the government established a 9 billion rands fund with the aim of reducing unemployment to 15% by 2020. Other initiatives included the introduction of tax breaks for manufacturers and policies of support for small businesses, as well as a youth development program. By the end of Zuma's term in 2014, however, little dent had been made. With over 1.1 million jobs having been lost during Zuma's first year in office, employment figures had somewhat recovered but still remained worse off than they were prior to the recession in percentage terms, as unemployment hovered at the 24.3% mark by the end of 2014. Much of the Zuma's administration's initial focus was directed towards ensuring the success of the 2010 FIFA World Cup, hosted by South Africa. Tourism and security were considered of great importance, for the World Cup as a successful tournament represented a golden opportunity for the country. There was a dramatic influx of visitors. As many as 1.4 million visited South Africa during the course of the tournament, but more crucially, it was hoped a lasting legacy for tourism and investor confidence could be created. This free advertising associated with the tournament alone has been estimated to have been worth $2 billion in value. A successful World Cup was also an incentive for boosting the country's morale and pride, a key tool for cross-cultural unification and nation building, as South Africa's success in the Rugby World Cup of 1995 had once testified to. The tournament was widely hailed as a success in the short term, with the upgrade in public transport a notable gain, despite concerns the costly maintenance of the stadiums would register as a financial liability to municipalities in forthcoming years.
Honorable Speaker, I don't know whether members want to play politics. Firstly, people every day say something about President Zuma in this country. Should I stand every day, take everybody to court? You say a lot of things about me. Should I do so? If I were
you can take me to court. You can, no,
he's answering
this is
you,
not your house.
Honorable Malema.
This is
Honorable Malema. It's not your turn.
The first couple of years of Zuma's term were rocked by fresh personal and political upheaval. A polygamist, Zuma was criticized for setting a bad example for South Africa's youth, particularly given the high expense of maintaining his marriages and the apparent contradiction between his sexual behavior and the ANC's stance on sex health. Zuma had already been wed 3 times prior to his marriage to Nompumelelo Ntuli in 2008, while he was still married to his first wife, Gertrude Sizakele Khumalo. Zuma had divorced from his second wife, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, in 1998, while his third wife, Kate Manso, had committed suicide in 2000. In 2010, Zuma had married for a 5th time, tying the knot with Thobeka Mabhija, with whom he had fathered a child in 2007. Criticism for Zuma became particularly outspoken in January 2010, following revelations he had another child, this time with Sonono Khoza, the daughter of prominent soccer administrator and businessman Ivan Khoza, back in 2009. Known as the Love Child Scandal, the revelation only continued to fuel debate in the press as supporters of polygamy argued the practice was a cultural tradition to be upheld and tolerated, with detractors' distaste allegedly amounting to nothing more than cultural intolerance. Critics, on the other hand, argued polygamy remained an obstacle to gender equality, while it was also argued to mix up the state's official line on safe sexual practice in an HIV-ravaged country. Zuma's fifth and then his sixth wedding, this time to Gloria Bongekile Ngema, in 2012, triggered criticism from the press and in parliament following the exposure of a spousal support budget. This figure, approximately double the budget afforded to Thabo Mbeki and Kgalema Motlanthe during their tenures, was criticized all the more given the contrast of Zuma's lifestyle with the plight of the country's poor. Zuma should only be afforded state support for his first wife, detractors argued, and should not be afforded funds for each of his wives in turn. The controversy was heightened all the more given the publishing of an article by the Mercury in 2010, which questioned the legality of some of Zuma's marriages, which suggested the spousal support budget itself might amount to an illegitimate drain of taxpayers' funds. Zuma was embroiled in another scandal in 2010 following his failure to declare his assets within the stipulated legal time frame, with the law requiring every cabinet member to fully list their permanent companions, assets, liabilities, and dependents within 60 days of taking office. Zuma failed to do so. The president was subsequently found to have implicated himself in an ethical breach, as regulations have been put in place to prevent clashes of interests between the president's private assets and those of the country. Zuma eventually did publicize his assets following criticism in the media. The president courted controversy yet again when fresh allegations over his alleged misuse of state funds relating to the development of his private residence in Nkandla came to light between 2011 and 2012.
If you listen to our good friends, the opposition, I'm telling you, you can think you live in another world. You know, some people who could not pronounce Nkandla, they've now learned Nkandla, Nkandla, Nkandla. Even if you tell them the Nkandla report is being processed, is going to come. 3 investigations have been made. Nkandla, even if we are discussing very serious matters, stand up, point of order. Yes, Nkandla. Tiggs was a George Koch.
Reports concluded Zuma had spent as much as 246 million rands on the property, over 40% of which was paid for by the state under the pretense of security expenses, including features such as housing for Zuma's relatives, a visitors center, a kraal, a marquee area, a visitors center, an amphitheater, as well as expensive paving. The charges against Zuma continue to alienate political opponents as well as large sectors of the media and public. Denounced for what would eventually be ruled an unconstitutional action, Zuma would not face prosecution for his actions until his second term in office. The greatest blemish of Zuma's first term in office was unquestionably that of the Marikana massacre, the greatest incident of police brutality in the country since the fateful Sharpeville shooting incident of 1960. Taking place 16 August 2012, the tragedy unfolded when a contingent of armed police forces engaged a crowd of peaceful protesters calling for wage increases at the Lone Mill Platinum Mine. The shooting was precipitated by 6 days of escalating violence amid the ongoing protest, in which different factions of mine workers, the National Union of Mine Workers and the Association of the Mine Workers Construction Union, clashed with one another as well as with security forces. Prior to the shooting, 10 people had already lost their lives, 2 of them security personnel. While the South African Police Service claimed to have acted in self-defense when they engaged the miners claimed they had simply sought an escape from their position, where they had been walled in by security forces. The shooting resulted in the deaths of 34 mine workers, while an additional 78 workers were wounded. Acting quickly to address the tragedy, as well as respond to rumors that political figures had colluded with SAPS to put an end to the strike, Zuma called for the establishment of an official commission to investigate. The tragedy appeared terrible. Given suggestions, the confrontation had been entirely avoidable. Lon Mill had at first agreed to meet with the leaders of mine workers to negotiate, but went back on their word as further security forces were called in. The incidents also marked a political turning point for Zuma in the eyes of his supporters, with the tragedy likened by many to apartheid-era violence and brutality. Critics questioned whether the country had really changed following 1994. Marikana had become symbolic of Zuma's struggles to tear down the black-white socio-economic disparity, while his inability to address wealth redisposition was beginning to cause ill feeling in pockets of his once unquestioning support. With Zuma's first term coming to a close, ANC supporters had become increasingly wary of the president. Well aware of the unfolding Nkandla scandal, rocked by Marikana, and angered by a lack of a significant improvement in their living standards, many were expressing a lot of faith in Zuma's ability to lead the country forward. While sanitation, access to electricity, and life expectancy of the country had increased during Zuma's tenure, economic growth had stalled to its lowest level in 16 years, while unemployment remained higher than when Zuma had first assumed office. This displeasure was subsequently mirrored by the voting patterns of the South African public in the forthcoming election, with the Zuma-led ANC losing significant ground as their majority share of the vote declined from 65.9% to 62.15% as the party's stronghold over the country took a notable knock ahead of Zuma's second term in office.